This battle took place in an unusual way. The two armies stood on opposite hills with a valley in between them. And from these distant hills, they shouted defiantly at each other. The deal was that each side would choose one warrior and the two of them would fight to the death, winner take all. The problem was who the Philistines chose to fight for them.
Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet, and his bronze coat of mail weighed 125 pounds. He also wore bronze leg armor, and he carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. His armor-bearer walked ahead of him, carrying a shield.
Incredibly, this scene took place for 40 days. The armies would draw up their opposing battle lines, Goliath would step forward, and the nation of Israel would tremble in fear. But things were about to change. David arrived on the scene just as Goliath was going into his defiant language.
Then David left his baggage in the care of the baggage keeper and ran to the battle line and entered in order to greet his brothers. As he was talking with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine from Gath named Goliath, was coming up from the army of the Philistines. And he spoke these same words, and David heard them. When all the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him and were greatly afraid.
I'm sure David couldn't believe his eyes, but his surprise was not with the giant Goliath. His surprise was that the nation of Israel's armies were running away. You see, David had a different perspective on the battle. Sure, in David's story, there was a giant, but David saw that this giant was in a much larger story. This battle was God's battle.
Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands."
Do you see the difference it makes when we rise above our own limited perspective and see things from a higher level? We see that it's not all about us. There's a bigger story going on. Through David, God brought victory to the nation of Israel. With Goliath defeated, the people enjoyed peace again. And now, as the army returned home from battle, the people came out and celebrated. But what should have been a joyful homecoming was the beginning of years of trouble for David.
When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs and with tambourines and lutes. As they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands."
Because God was with David, he enjoyed tremendous success in everything that he did. So much so that King Saul became jealous. On more than one occasion, Saul tried to kill David, but David was able to escape. Finally, David fled for his life and lived for years on the run.
Deliver me from my enemies, O God. Protect me from those who rise up against me. Deliver me from evildoers and save me from bloodthirsty men. See how they lie in wait for me? Fierce men conspire against me for no offense or sin of mine, O Lord. I have done no wrong, yet they are ready to attack me. Arise to help me. Look on my plight.
God protected David from Saul. And during this time, David gathered a band of followers that were loyal to him. Upon Saul's death, there would be 7 years of fighting between those loyal to David and those loyal to Saul's family. But finally, David, the man after God's own heart, would become king over all Israel. Upon becoming king over all Israel, David took the city of Jerusalem as his own. He named it the City of David, and from here he led Israel for 33 years. Later, Nathan the prophet reflected with these words from God. Now therefore, thus shall you say to my servant David, Thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, that you should be leader over my people Israel. And I have been with you wherever you have gone, and have cut off all your enemies from before you, and I will make you a name like the name of the great ones who are in the earth. From shepherd to king, how did that happen? From least among his brothers to greatest in the kingdom, how was that possible? God found in David a man whose heart was turned toward him, and God was able to use that. Even when David falls, which we'll read about in the next chapter, God is able to restore him because David recognizes God's the source of that. David also sees that God is the one who needs to change his heart. What's the status of your heart? Do you tend to lean toward God or away from Him? Could you be referred to as a man or woman after God's heart? As we allow God's story to become more and more real in our lives, our hearts will change. We'll become more in tune with God's plans, more in tune with God's heart.
Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting.